Hi everyone, my name is Robin Boch, and I'm a senior Newcomb Scholar at Tulane, majoring in Political Science, Communications, and French. Thank you all so much for watching my honors thesis presentation, and I hope you enjoy. The title of my honors thesis is Media, Populism, and Surprise Elections, the U.S. 2016 and France 2002 presidential elections, and this is a thesis written in the departments of Political Science and Communications. To begin my presentation, I want to talk a bit about my two main case studies for this project. I'm starting with the France 2002 presidential election case. During my semester abroad in Paris, I took a course on media and public opinion in France. My major semester project was entitled L'élection présidentielle de 2002, une crise politique et médiatique. It did not take long before I realized not only why this election is considered a media and political crisis, but also why it's such an important part of France's history. For a bit of context, there are far more people who run for president in France than there are in the US, sometimes around 60 candidates, and there are two rounds of the elections. In the first round, they narrow it down to two candidates, and then those two candidates compete in a second round for the presidency. To explain this election, I want to start by talking about three important candidates, and the first is Jacques Chirac. He was the incumbent president of France and was known to be capable and well-liked, so everyone generally assumed that he was a likely pick for this election as well. Next is Lionel Jospin. Jospin was the incumbent prime minister, so he also had proven his abilities, but was often overshadowed by Chirac's personality and policies. He was still a safe choice, and the majority of voters confidently believed that these two would be the finalists moving on to the second round of the election. This being said, it's also important to introduce Jean-Marie Le Pen. Le Pen was a far-right populist candidate from the Front National party, and he made a big impact on this election through his personality, controversial statements, and policies that were generally focused on limiting immigration, terrorism, and crime in France. Media and voters did not seem to take him seriously, and he typically ranked around 5th or 6th place in the polls. When the results came out from the first round of the election, people around the world were shocked. The chart on the left shows a sample of a poll published before the election, while those on the right show the results from the first and second rounds. Le Pen beat out Jospin for a spot in the second round of the election, and even though Chirac ended up winning by a landslide in the end, the day these first results came out was called an earthquake, and Jospin quit politics forever because he was so surprised. So while I was originally researching this project, everything I read kept bringing me back to what I've learned in my courses about the US 2016 presidential election. So this is the thought process that began my comparative study. As many people know, there were two major candidates in the US 2016 presidential election. First was Hillary Clinton, the nominee from the Democratic Party. Clinton had lots of experience within the US political system and was pretty well respected among most people. But she also faced a number of scandals during her campaign and was criticized for being a corrupt politician from Washington that voters could not trust. Even with these issues, most voters agreed that Clinton was a pretty safe choice for who would win the election. The second major candidate was Donald Trump. Trump was a non-traditional candidate in the sense that he was a businessman and had some controversial ideas and policies. While many people were offended by the ways in which Trump spoke, others really resonated with him because they thought he was the strong and honest president that America needed. Most polls placed Hillary Clinton as the expected winner of the 2016 presidential election, but as election day continued to approach, Trump was rising in the polls. In the end, Trump was the winner of this election. I remember being surprised, as well as my professors and friends being confused by this result, so in this project I want to explore why we did not see this coming, as well as why people were so surprised when Le Pen made it to the second round of the France 2002 election. As you can see here, this project includes an intro and conclusion, as well as 4 major chapters that I will be discussing in this presentation. My research question is, in the US 2016 and France 2002 presidential elections, how did earned media's interactions with populist candidates and discourses contribute to election results that many voters found surprising? And the phrase earned media in this statement refers to news media coverage of the candidates that they did not pay for and therefore had no editorial control over. I figured out my major question and cases I wanted to use for this project pretty early on, but it was more difficult to find a way to measure and explain this. I decided to perform a content analysis study. I looked at 25 articles per case, read through them, and then based on keywords and other qualitative criteria, I grouped them into categories that would explain some of my major topics.
You'll see some of the results from this study through a number of charts and graphs in this presentation. The first chapter of my honors thesis is Insecurity in Immigration, Terrorism, and Crime. As you can see here, even though all these subtopics were important to both elections, immigration was by far the most discussed in the earned media coverage. By discussing these topics so much during the campaign periods, earned media served as a form of agenda setting, encouraging voters to care about these issues when choosing their president. Because populist candidates Donald Trump and Jean-Marie Le Pen had by far the strongest and most dramatic measures about insecurity issues in their respective countries, voters saw them as the most capable to address these problems, even if some of their policies were controversial. Even though earned media coverage did not directly support these populist candidates, through discussing these policies so much, this contributed to their overall successes. Even though most of my research about these elections discusses issues of insecurity as the primary policy issues this election was concerned about, I found through my own study that issues concerning economics appeared in the earned media coverage even more. I found that the subtopic with the most mentions within economics was general economic issues. This category included things like unemployment and job creation, and this relates to insecurity because people without jobs generally feel insecure. Similar to issues concerning insecurity as discussed in the last chapter, the populist candidates Donald Trump and Jean-Marie Le Pen had some of the strongest and most dramatic policies regarding economic issues in their countries. Because the media coverage discussed economics so much, this contributed to the success of Trump and Le Pen once again. Even though earned media did not explicitly support these candidates, through the process of agenda setting, this aided their campaigns. The third major chapter of my thesis discusses the cycle of controversy that occurred in both of these elections. The populist candidates had big personalities and new ideas, and as a result, they received so much extra attention. Anytime Trump or Le Pen said or did something controversial, earned media coverage of them increased. In the U.S. 2016 election, Trump was discussed more than any other candidate in the media coverage. Most of his earned media was about his personality and not about his policies, and most of this coverage was negative. In addition, in many of the articles used in this study, he was not considered to be a valid candidate. The graph here shows that around half the articles took him seriously, while many others did not. Because earned media did talk about Donald Trump so much, even if it was negative, this seemed to legitimize his campaign. Additionally, media outlets talked a lot about his policy issues he was known for, as seen through the previous two chapters, which also supported his campaign. Even though news media outlets did not seem to be supporting Donald Trump outwardly, they did contribute to his success. There was a similar cycle of controversy with Jean-Marie Le Pen in the France 2002 case. Earned media discussed Le Pen quite a bit. He was the third most discussed in the media, which is interesting because he was usually ranked around 5th or 6th in the polls. Additionally, the coverage about Le Pen was more about his policies than his personalities, but even that being said, his policies were still sensationalized in the media, just like Trump's personality was. Le Pen experienced some positive and some negative earned media coverage, but he was hardly ever portrayed as being a valid candidate with a chance of winning. Similar to Trump, earned media talked so much about Le Pen during this election, not because they thought he had a chance of winning, but rather because he was an interesting and controversial figure who was always stirring up trouble. Despite many news outlets discounting Le Pen and his potential for succeeding in this election, the news media coverage of Le Pen in the France 2002 election ultimately contributed to his success. By talking about him so much, this legitimized his campaign, and some people even liked the image that news media outlets were creating of him as a controversial and interesting figure that was so new to France. The final major chapter of my thesis discusses the idea of an element of surprise. Why were so many people surprised when Jean-Marie Le Pen made it so far in the France 2002 election and when Donald Trump won the 2016 U.S. election? I found through my research that the most likely reason why this happened is because even though media outlets said one thing, they were doing something else. Many outlets spoke negatively about Trump and Le Pen and said they had no chance of winning, but by discussing their major policy issues and talking about them so much, this contributed to their success. There was also a lot of incorrect polling that occurred by news media outlets in both of these cases. Many voters feared answering truthfully because they did not want to admit they were voting for someone controversial like Trump or Le Pen. When voters saw the safe options were doing so well in the polls, as seen on the right, they did not feel like voting was a necessity and did not turn out to the polls on election day. I think the major difference between these elections and other recent elections with populist candidates is the way in which earned media acted in these situations. Once again, while outwardly discounting populist candidates, many outlets actually contributed to their success by talking about them and their policies so much. My hope throughout this research project was to explore the dynamics that took place in both elections and see how media and populism have the potential to affect politics around the world. I created the term pop elections in my honors thesis to explain the symbiosis between populism and earned media. I hope that this phrase displays a sense of surprise, but also includes elements like populism and pop culture that took place in both of these elections. Through this project, I also wanted to make a foreign case seem more relevant. I studied this project primarily in France, but everything I read seemed significant to the study of the US 2016 election as well. I think it's important to know that the surprise we felt in 2016 was not an isolated event and that this happens in other places around the world as well. We can all learn from this research and also think about the implications this has for the future. Overall, it's important to notice that just because something surprising happened one time in one case, this could also be happening in other places around the world in other time periods. We should learn from these cases and think more about the ways in which forces like earned media and populism interact so that we can make better educated political decisions in the future.
So before I conclude this presentation, I would like to take just a moment to acknowledge some of the people who have helped me along the way through the process of researching, writing, and now presenting my honors thesis. First, I'd like to thank my faculty committee, which included Professor Patrick Egan from Political Science, Professor Faru Yilmaz from Communications, and Professor Michelle Adams from the Sociology Department. I'd also like to thank everyone at Newcomb Institute for your continued support over the last 4 years, especially the professors and mentors we've had along the way, as well as my own Newcomb Scholars cohort. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for watching today, as well as my family and friends who have heard me go on and on about French and US media and politics for years now. Thank you all so much for your support, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learning a little bit about my research.